Good morning. Welcome to the last session before lunch. For lunch, if you would, there'll be tables outside that have meals on them. Just grab one, take it to any of the theaters that you care to. Please visit our sponsors. They're the ones who make all of this possible. Also, too, if you have any questions, please put them in the green Slack channel. Then, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Barry Tarlton. He'll be our speaker, and he'll be speaking about Raspberry Pis and IoT.
So my name is Barry Tarlton, and this is the Pi, Python, and Paintball, Innovating with Affordable Tech talk. I have a link to my slides up here, but don't worry about that. That'll be at the end. It is bit.ly/Pi Paintball, though. I've got a lot to cover, so I will hopefully have time for questions at the end. Otherwise, I'll be right outside this theater at the Nationwide booth the rest of the day, so you can stop by there. But real quick, my experience, my background is I have worked at Nationwide for the last 12 years as a software developer. I worked 6 years before that at another company. Some of the technologies I worked with are on the screen here: Java, Groovy, Node, worked with Apogee, AngularJS. So that's kind of my experience background. So the goals for this presentation is hopefully one is to open your mind a little bit and understand a little bit about what's possible in the world of IoT. The other thing is, how do I get started? Maybe you haven't worked with Arduino or Raspberry Pis before and you're curious, how do I actually get started? What are the steps involved? So I'm going to briefly cover that at the beginning. And then I'm going to go through some of my projects that I've been working on. And I will say I'm not an expert. I've only been working with these kind of projects for the last year and a half or so. But I've learned a lot, so I now hopefully can tell you how not to do the stupid things that I did. And so hopefully we'll all learn something throughout this process. So to begin with, just a quick introduction to Raspberry Pis. Raspberry Pi are described as a small, affordable computer that you can use to learn programming. They are created by the Raspberry Pi Foundation, which is actually a UK-based charity. And their goal, their mission statement, was to put the power of digital making into the hands of people all over the world so that they are capable of understanding and shaping our increasingly digital world, able to solve the problems that matter to them, and equipped for the jobs of the future. So they produced these Raspberry Pis, several actually came out quite a few years ago, and they continue to add new models and new improvements to them. And when they say small and affordable, they really mean that. There's two main models right now that are popular. It's the Pi 3 and the Pi 0. And there's a few flavors of each of those. But I'm going to just give you a breakdown of the two main models out there right now. So there's the Pi 3B+, which is kind of like the big, the powerhouse, if you will. But it's still only $35. And the new model they just came out with is a quad-core 1.4 gigahertz processor with 1 gigs of RAM, 4 full-size USB ports, a standard HDMI port, and they have an audio port, the normal 3.5 millimeter jack for audio. And you can actually use this as a desktop computer. I have one set up in my daughter's bedroom, hooked up to a keyboard, mouse, and monitor, and it has a GUI environment that she can browse the web and also do some programming on. The Pi 0 is much smaller form factor. From the pictures here, I don't know if you can really understand. If you haven't seen the Pi 3 is about the size of a credit card, a little bit bigger. The Pi 0 is about the size of a stick of gum. Okay? It's cheaper. It's about $10 to $15. $15 typically for the wireless version. That's the Pi 0W. It's a single-core 1 gigahertz processor, so not as much power, of course. And then it's got 512 megs of memory, so half the amount of memory. 1 micro USB, and then 1 mini HDMI. So these would be good for less process-intensive tasks, but where you still want the portability. And even if you get the Pi 0W, you have wireless access. So to compare that to the Arduino, as I said, the Pi 0, or the Pis, is actually like a full-fledged computer. Where the Arduino is actually, they define it as an open-source electronics platform based on easy-to-use hardware and software. And when they say open source, that means the design is open, so anyone can make Arduino boards. So that's why you go to Amazon, you find a bunch of different manufacturers making Arduinos. And as long as they are officially following their spec, this open source platform, it'll work as any other one. But the biggest thing with an Arduino is that it's a simple microcontroller, which basically means when you buy an Arduino, you typically install the IDE. There's an IDE you can download. You can write C-like code, and you push a button, kind of like Go, and that will install the code on the Arduino through a USB cable, and then that code will run over and over and over again in a loop. Okay, so simple microcontroller typically it can run one program just over and over again in a loop. It's funny, a lot of people getting into IoT, they think that the Arduinos are much easier and simpler to use because there's a lot less going on. For me, coming to software development background, I found the Pis much easier because it's just a computer, a small computer, but it's got a full-fledged OS on it, and I can write my code in whatever language I want, Java, JavaScript, Node. Now, you can use other languages for the Arduino as well, but just the paradigm of working with a Pi made more sense to me and was easier. The Arduino, though, is less steps involved as far as that goes. So it's not that one is better than the other. They serve different purposes. When I was reading some articles trying to compare, hey, how do you choose the Arduino over the Pi? It really comes down to the project you're going to do. And one thing they said was that if your project includes more than one ant... Oops, sorry.
5 minutes.
My timer is still going. Let me set this higher so it doesn't interrupt us anymore. All right, I'll come back to that later. So if your project has more than one and in it, you might want to consider a Pi, meaning let's say I want a project to monitor the moisture level of my plants in my house. And when the moisture level gets so low, I want to turn on a sprinkler system or somehow add water. Then if I say, and I want to be text notified of that event happening, well, once you start adding more ands, you might want to consider using a Pi, because in the Pi, you can write those as simple individual programs that execute. Anyways, just something to consider. So that's kind of the main difference between a Pi and Arduino. Now, for starting a Raspberry Pi project, like I said, it is a full-fledged computer, so how do you get started? Well, the first step is to download and install an OS. So you get the Pi itself. You have to then get a micro SD card and install an operating system on that SD card. If you go to RaspberryPi.org, the default option they give you is Raspbian, which is a Debian-based Linux with a bunch of Raspberry tools, Raspberry Pi specific tools installed on top. And with that, they have two flavors. One is the desktop version, which gives you a GUI interface. So you can use a mouse with it, browse the web, has a web browser, that stuff built in. And then the light version. The light version just gives you the terminal-based, console-based access. And so for most of my projects, I use the light version. Obviously, for my daughter, the Pi 3 in her room, we have the desktop version, so she can actually use it with a keyboard and mouse and have a monitor hooked up to it. So once you have the OS installed, you need to write that to a micro SD card. There's a free tool called Etcher you can download to do that. There's a lot of different tools to do this, to just flash the OS to a card. So once you have the micro SD card with an OS installed on it, that's kind of like your hard drive. You insert that into the Pi. Next thing you need is a way to power it up. The way they've designed it is that they can be powered by simple phone chargers. Your modern day phone charger through a micro USB connection. You can even hook it up to your PC sometimes if you have enough power and power it that way. Other power options, you can use battery backups. That's what the projects I'll be talking about today. I use a simple phone battery backup for them. Or you can really use anything with 5 volts DC out and preferably 2 or more amps. RaspberryPi.org, their website, recommends 2.4, 2.5 amps, I think it is. With the Pi 3s, with the quad-core processor, you do want to probably stay around that above 2 amps. The Pi Zeros, I find you can get away with a lot less. It depends on what else you add to it, but just make sure you understand the amp rating of some of the old phone chargers don't have enough amps to power the Pi 3 adequately. You can also use a PC power supply. If you're like me, you have a bunch of old PCs lying around, don't know what to do with them, well, you can rip out the power supply and wire them up. This is another project I'll talk about at the end, but this is an old PC power supply. And if you're wondering why does it look so nasty and what's that thing duct taped on the top, well, that's an old hard drive. It turns out some old PC power supplies will not even come on unless there's some sort of load on it. Now, if you take a power supply out, to turn it on, you have to jump 2 wires. You just have to connect 2 of the wires and That's the power on switch. But even with that, if you don't have load on some of the older ones, they won't power on. So the easiest way I found to make load was to duct tape an old hard drive I'm not using and just plug it in, and then it powers right on. Anyways, we'll come back to that. But your PC power supplies have 12-volt rails and 5-volt rails. So you can use the 5-volt rails on here to power your Pi. And they typically have plenty of amps to spare. So once you have your OS on a micro SD card, you have the power for it. You want to typically first hook it up to a keyboard and display. With the Pi Zeros, like I mentioned, it has a mini HDMI. So if you have the little tiny Pi Zeros to hook it up, you'd need some sort of adapter like this, mini HDMI to HDMI. Also, for the Pi Zeros, you'd need a micro USB to USB adapter or a hub, something like this to plug your keyboard and if you needed to, a mouse into it. Actually, in these little boxes you see in front of me, I'll talk about, I have a hub like this or an adapter to plug in a USB sound card to produce sound out of the Pi Zeros. If you have the Pi 3, it has the full-size HDMI and full-size USB, so you don't need the adapters, and you can plug it straight into a TV or monitor to boot it up and to use it that way. One last thing I'd recommend as far as getting started, so actually going back. So if you have all of this, keyboard, mouse, you have the power and the thing, you boot up the Pi, and you get welcomed with whatever operating system you put on there. And then you could actually start using it. It's a Linux-based operating system running on a tiny computer. If you're thinking about going further with a Pi project and saying, hey, I'd like to incorporate some buttons, switches, or lights, I'd recommend you get a starter kit. Get one with a breadboard and other accessories that allows you to play with the different connections, playing with switches, lights, and test them out. I found this really cheap one off of Amazon, and it's $18. It comes with a lot of stuff. It's not the highest quality, it is cheap, but it met my purposes. So again, this is if you think you're going to go a little bit further with things and actually play with lights and more than just use it as a computer. So that's my brief introduction to how to get started with a Raspberry Pi and how they're kind of different from an Arduino. So now I want to take you back to the motivation of my first Raspberry Pi project. And looking at this picture, you might be saying, what? It actually started about 4 years ago. My son was about to turn 10. This is my son here in the picture. This is a more recent picture, though. But back when he was about to turn 10, he wanted to do a birthday party that involved paintball. He wanted to do a paintball birthday party. So I said, okay. So I started calling around, trying to find someone in my area that could host a game and had the equipment. Turns out I found this guy named Don Stroud, who he just lived 2 miles away from my house. Never knew him. But he had been running paintball games for over a decade and had all the equipment. And so he said, sure, I'll run a paintball game for you. And we got hooked up. Well, after playing with him, there I am. And I got addicted. Then later my daughter, who's actually a little bit older than my son, she got addicted. And so we started playing paintball a lot and started playing with him. And as we started getting to know Don more, we found out that his passion wasn't really just about paintball. He had a passion for the kids in this area. So I have to take you back to help you understand, where I'm from. I'm from Southern Ohio, or as we say, Southern Ohio. And this is a map of Ohio by the poverty level in each county, where the red is the lower poverty levels. So if you look down here in the southern part of Ohio, it's a pretty poor area. We actually have a large drug and alcohol problem, and it's a rural area. There's not a whole lot to do around there. And so Don, seeing this, and I think it was in the late 90s, he actually started a nonprofit ministry organization called Christian Youth Development. He wanted to provide a safe environment for kids, something for them to do to keep them out of trouble. He provided camping, go-karts, games, and paintball. He had been in the military and actually used paintball at times for training, and he really had liked paintball. And so he wanted to share his love with the kids, but also always trying to help develop integrity and character in these kids to help set them on the right path. So me and my family not only fell in love with paintball, but we fell in love with Don and his mission and his purpose. And so we actually started for the last 4 years helping him run paintball games. He had a big field at his place, property he bought for this ministry. We had run games there. We actually set up a field in the woods behind my house. I live in rural, like Southern Ohio, and so he helps me run games at my place. We've even done games in exotic locations like these underground mines in Southern Ohio called white gravel mines. Anyways, but one of the things over the last 4 years helping him run games is that I found we always have this Well, there's Don and Betty, his wife. They're the ones that run the games. And this is the annual Ohio State versus Michigan game. Don loves to antagonize people. He says he supports Michigan. I don't think he really cares about football. But he has people that come on this day when Ohio State plays Michigan, and he has this huge paintball game. And it's kind of like a reunion as well. All the people he's worked with over the last 2 decades come back. And at this game, we had like over 50 players. This was just this past November. And when you have these large games, some of the problems we have is balancing that fine line, what I call, between organization versus controlled chaos. Right? If you look at this picture, you can see there's a wide range of ages there. And also what you don't see is a wide range of people familiar with the game of paintball and how things work. So some of the issues we come into when running paintball games are like, when do we start? It's kind of important to know when you can start shooting people, right? But equally as important is to know when the round is over, when to stop shooting other people. So also sometimes we have like 35-minute rounds, sometimes longer. If you get hit in the first 2 minutes of the round and you come out, can you ever go back in? So these are common things just around the organization of paintball. So some of the things we've tried is, in what you typically see at fields, you see referees sometimes with walkie-talkies to communicate across the large field. We've sometimes used loudspeakers and air horns to help signal when events are happening. We've even used a phone app that allows you to set in a timer and have it talk at certain times. The issue with all of these is that either, one, it took a lot of human resources, a lot of manpower to cover, and especially covering a large field is hard, or it took a lot of speakers that we couldn't run power to distributed across the field. So my solution I came up with was these distributed speaking timers, if you can see here in front of me. These are little boxes that contain RaspberryPis, and there's multiple of them. I actually have 4 of them with displays on them. I have actually a couple more without the displays. But they are all connected through a server wirelessly. And the idea is that we would take these and put them at the different starting points. And since we play in the woods, they actually literally hang in the trees at some of our areas. And each of these little boxes has a Pi 0 wireless, a Pi 0W, and then there's a server, which I actually have right now outside behind this theater in the hallway, they're all connected to. And the idea is that before the game started, we could set a timer, and that timer would then go out to all the boxes, and these boxes also have speakers, so they can announce different events. They can say, hey, 2 minutes before the round starts, 1 minute before the round starts, hey, test fire, and then it'll give you a countdown, 10, 9, 8, 7, and all that. And then throughout the game, if you get hit, you go back to that spot, you see the big pink box, that's where I go, and I stand there, and I wait for it to announce when I can go back in. And so we have it programmed so that at certain intervals, it will announce how much time is left, and that's their cue to go back into the game. So as I mentioned, I've never really, actually before this project, I'd never really touched a Pi. I've never touched a Raspberry Pi, did anything like this. And I knew going into this, one of the things I'd have to have is come up with a digital display for the Pi. I need it to be bright so you could see it from outdoors. I need it to be easily controllable from the Pi, so I could control it with the code, and affordable. After doing some research, I came up and I found that there was these 7-segment displays by a company called Adafruit. And they weren't as big as I was hoping. They're smaller, but it turned out they worked out really well. And especially they're only just under $20 shipped. So, and as you can maybe see here, they actually are pretty bright. Of course, it's dark in here. But even in direct sunlight, we put a shade over it. It's a high tech. I take a piece of cardboard and duct tape and make a little visor over top of it, and they work great out in the sunlight. But anyways, and this is actually the URL at the bottom is where I bought a bunch of them, found the cheapest place for buying them. If you buy them actually in big bulk, you can get it a lot cheaper, but if you're buying them like I did, 3 or 4 at a time, you don't get that big of a discount. But one of the big problems I found when I first got the display was when I read through the description quickly, and it sounded like it was fully assembled because it says assembled backpack as well as a 7-segment display. But then it said you need to solder the matrix onto the backpack, but it's an easy task. I said, what? Easy for who? I wasn't very good with a soldering iron. And so this is not an actual picture of my soldering job, but it's pretty close. I'm a soldering novice. Actually, it's funny. I brought the two displays in here that I had my buddy help me solder the displays together. The one that's out there at the booth, there's another one out there. If you look at the top part of the display, it glitches. It sometimes is working, sometimes not. That's the first one I soldered, which I need to go back and fix it, but I haven't yet. So a lot of my biggest issues around getting into this project was just that I was, a very novice when it comes to soldering, and also as an electronics newbie. I didn't really have a great grasp of understanding diodes, resistors, transistors, all those kinds of things, but I learned a lot. So that was fun. Once I got the display assembled, I didn't have to worry about controlling it from code. When I first started looking around, I only found a few examples, and most of them were for Arduino. Well, I was using a Raspberry Pi, so I did some more research, and luckily I was able to find that Adafruit, the company that made the display, they had this Adafruit Python LED backpack package. They had this Python package that you could download, and in their GitHub repo, I found their examples, and that saved my behind, because I was able to go look into their examples folder and find exactly a sample code of how to control this display. It's confusing. I was actually a little frustrated that I couldn't find easier examples or tutorials online, but I was able to go to GitHub, to their repo, and find the examples I needed. So once I had that, I was able to actually write information out to the display. But then the big question came up. I knew I was going to have multiple ones of these, and so how do I get them to communicate? How do I create a wireless network outside? And especially in rural places at times, without having any internet access, right? I can't assume that there's going to be Wi-Fi available. So I had to come up with my own Wi-Fi solution. I did a whole bunch of research about different long-range wireless, and I finally found out that I could just use a simple outdoor wireless access point. I found one fairly cheap on Amazon. It's a TP-Link long-range wireless outdoor access point. I normally set it up on a large pole, like 10, 15 feet up in the air, and I have it connected to a Pi 3, which I use as a DHCP server. So instead of having a router behind the scenes, I just use the Pi 3, which, as we'll see, controls a lot of things. But the Pi 3 also is the guy that assigns IPs to everyone. So you have the Pi 0 wirelesses that are all connected. All these little boxes are connected through this wireless access point. And it's a funny story, when I first set this up, I was like, oh man, I hope I get the range out of this. So the way I tested, I had one of these little boxes, and I had my son take it, and from my laptop in the house where my wireless access point was, I SSH'd, secure shelled into the Pi in the box. And I said, start walking, boy. And so he started walking, and I kept running commands, on the Pi that was actually in the box he was carrying, to check what wireless networks it could see, and also the signal strength of those. It's kind of funny, as he got closer to some of my neighbors, I could see their networks and pop up. And I knew, obviously, if I could continue to send commands and get a message back, I was connected. But I could also see the signal strength. And anyways, long and short of it, we had plenty of range for what we need. I haven't really tested the full extent, but we've covered, probably a couple acres as far as range, putting this in the middle, being able to spread our boxes out. So that was getting the wireless connectivity between these different boxes. The next thing I had to worry about was keeping time. I knew that these things were going to count down and track the time, and they were going to be distributed. So how do we synchronize or keep them all on the same time, right? Kind of like, how do we say synchronize your watch now? Because, excuse me, one thing, there's no internet, right? We couldn't assume we were going to have internet, and no clock battery. On our normal PCs, you set the time, and if you shut it down for a week, you turn it back on, it still knows what day and time it is, because it's got this little clock battery that retains that information. Well, for the Pis, they don't have a clock battery. And also, even on our PCs, if you sometimes don't have that clock battery, they can go out to the internet and to time servers and figure out what time it is and set themselves. But we didn't have any of that with the Pis. Now, you can, with the Raspberry Pi, you can get a real-time clock battery and add that. But that was an added accessory I didn't want to buy and have in the mix. There's other solutions too. But I didn't want to build my own solution. I knew I was already going to have this server, so I decided to go ahead and use the network time protocol, which this is something I had to research and learn way more than I ever wanted to about the network time protocol. But really all it comes down to is I made the Pi 3, the server, be the source of truth for all the boxes. And I used an existing network time protocol. I could install the network time protocol software on my Pi 3 server, and then I configure the boxes to go to it to find out what time it is. And the Pi 3 I don't even care what the real time is or what the date is, as long as they all share the same time. So through the network time protocol, it actually works really well. Even if one of the boxes has been off for several hours and you plug it back in, if a timer is running, it'll kick up and you see that it'll be off a little bit. The timer will be off. But after a minute or two, the network time protocol will bring it back in line and automatically adjust to the right time. So this was it actually worked out really well once I got that set up. So now we got a wireless network. We got them all synchronized. How do I communicate across them? Like, hey, to send a message to say start a timer. Well, I ended up using MQTT, which is a simple messaging protocol that we use in a lot of IoT things. And I used, the implementation was Mosquito. Some people say it differently. Anyways, I'll just go with Mosquito. So what I ended up doing was I set a static IP on my server. So in this way, my server doesn't care about how many boxes you have. It just has a static IP, and it has an MQTT queue or topic that it writes to. So what happens is you drop a message in this queue, and what I do is actually say an end time. Hey, start a timer that ends at 1:45. So let's say these boxes pick it up at 1:30. Well, they know, hey, I've got to create a 15-minute timer. And so they start counting down to that point into the future, so for 15 minutes. And so all these Pis know the IP address, or all the little boxes, they know the IP address of the server. And so they're just always listening to a message to drop onto that topic. So when a message gets dropped there, they all pull it and they set the timer appropriately. Right? And the reason I did this end time is if I said, hey, start a 15-minute timer, and one box picked it up 10 seconds later than another box, they would be out of sync, right? Or what if I had to restart one of the boxes? Well, whenever it came back up, if it said, oh, start a 10-minute timer, it would be way off. So using this, if they're all on the same time, they all just look to the same point in the future and say, hey, create a timer that ends at this point in the future. So Mosquito and MQTT was actually, it allows me to do this publish subscribe pattern that I described. And as I mentioned, if a timer box restarts, I can leave the last known message on there. So when the box comes back up, it goes back to that topic, finds the message, and it picks back up and gets synchronized with all the other ones. This is a little bit of code here that runs on the timer boxes. You can't see on here that there's a line at the bottom that says basically to connect to the server IP, which is like 10.0.0.1. And then it subscribes, this onConnect method, it subscribes to the timer topic there. And then when a message comes in, this gets automatically called. Now I'm using Mosquito. Let me go back. I'm using Mosquito, but there's as the implementation for the topics, it creates the topics. There's a client called Payo. I don't know if that's the right way to pronounce it, but there's a package you can install in Python to allow Python to talk to any MQTT supported software. So Mosquito is my implementation. It's a package, kind of a messaging package I installed on the Pi 3, the server, and then I use this Payo Python package to allow me to talk using MQTT from code. So my issue, though, was when I built this thing, I didn't want to have to keep dropping MQTT messages every time I wanted to start the timers. I wanted to create a simple REST API on top of the server so that I could just submit a simple JSON message to say start a timer. So I did that. I ended up building a simple REST API so I could just say, hey, call the timer API and let the server then write the message to the queue. And also I wanted my API to be more simplistic. I didn't want to have to say start a timer that ends 15 minutes in the future. I would just say, hey, start a 28-minute timer, start a 30-minute timer, and then let the server calculate what that time is in the future and then drop the message to the queue. So to do REST calls in Python, I ended up using Flask. The Flask framework, this was actually the most simple to use of all the development I did within Python. Maybe it's my background, working with things like Spring MVC or Spring's REST controllers and things like that, or even Express in Node. Flask works just kind of like you would expect it. You really just annotate a method to say, hey, map this URI, this pattern, to a method. And it actually is one of the few things that worked just as I expected without a whole lot of research and playing around with it. So, but with Flask, I set up these simple HTTP calls to basically send messages by just saying, hey, start a timer for 28 minutes. Then I wanted to make them talk. So I didn't want people to have to stare at the timer and to always look at that and try to figure out, can I go back in yet, or how much time till the round starts. So I decided I wanted to make them speak. And that's what, if you can see on the top of here, these are little cheap USB-powered speakers. And I actually ended up using eSpeak, this open source text-to-speech software. This is a package you can install in Linux or install on your OS. And you can actually run it from the command line, and it does text-to-speech. So I can pop out. You probably won't be able to hear this, but I've got, this is actually, I'm SSH'd into, I think, the box below me. And from the command line, if I just say, hello, Stir Trek.
Hello, Stir Trek.
Yeah, so you can't pick that up on the mic, but it actually said, hello, Stir Trek. But eSpeak is just a software, or just a package, application you can install. And then from the command line even, you can give it any kind of text and it'll speak it out. So I decided to use it mainly because it was free. The quality wasn't that great, but all the other packages I found you had to pay for, and the API wasn't as simple. This was very simple. You just say eSpeak and give it text, and it says it. However, to use it, I had to update my timer message. So instead of just saying, hey, start a 28-minute timer or 30-minute timer, I had to also say at certain points, certain intervals, say this thing, right? So what I ended up doing is this is a sample request message that shows on the right side the JSON that I send to the server to start a timer. We typically have 25-minute rounds, so this starts a 28-minute timer, gives them 3 minutes to get there and get all set up. And at 27 minutes, it tells them, hey, make your plans ready. That lets you know you have 2 minutes, right? And then at 26 minutes, it tells you to test fire, get things ready. Normally, we have another 30-minute or 30-second warning. And then 10 seconds before 25 minutes, when the round starts, it does this countdown. And these parms you see in there are just parameters you can pass to eSpeak. That -s changes how fast the text-to-speech, how the speech comes out. So if it's talking too fast, you slow it down. If you see at the very bottom, to get the countdown, the 10, 9, 8, to actually work, synchronized with the seconds, I had to slow the speech way down. So it goes 10, 9, 8. But anyways, this was the API I came up with to set up timers. So now I'm just low-tech, just using a program like Postman, or on my phone I have something similar where I can just submit a JSON request and send this request to the server, and it sets the timer and everything goes. It'd be real easy, and I plan to in the near future to create an app for a phone or something like that that is just more easy to use. But ultimately, this is what gets submitted and sent across the wire. So real quick demo, I've already showed you the example there, kind of the request. I'll just create a 2-minute timer here, and if I get close with my mic.
This is the best demo ever.
Yeah.
Best demo.
So I set a 2-minute timer, and at 1:58 it says this is the best demo ever. At 1:45 it's supposed to say I love demos.
I love demos.
There we go.
I love demos.
And at 1:30 it's supposed to say let's get to the good stuff now, which basically says, okay, enough with the demo, let's get back to the presentation. And
Let's get to the good stuff now.
all right. And one of the parameters is kind of funny with eSpeak. You can actually give it a parameter, change the voice. Do you want a male voice, a female voice? What dialect do you want? Do you want an American dialect? Do you want an English dialect? However, in my experience, no matter what dialect you give it, it sounds like a British person speaking. So like if you tell them, hey, speak in an American accent, it sounds like a British person imitating a bad American accent. So anyways, I would eventually like to swap out the speech software because eSpeak, like I said, the voice quality is not all that great, not that clear at times. But anyways, like I said, it's free, easy to use. So now, as the demo said, now to the cool stuff. So I actually started this project, when was it? Middle of last year, probably. And we always have that annual Ohio State versus Michigan game, which is in November. So I wanted to get this stuff all ready for November. And I actually got it ready for October, and we had a game at my field, which is a little bit smaller, and tried it all out, and it worked fine. And then I said, hey, what can we do cooler for our big Ohio State versus Michigan game. What could I do next? So in my mind, I wanted to bring a video game to life. I actually had this idea in the back of my head for a long time. Growing up, actually after I got out of college, I was big into video games, first-person shooters like Counter-Strike. And in there, we used to have LAN parties. This was before the internet, or at least high-speed internet, was popular in our area, so in Ohio. So we'd have like 20 people bring their computers to my house. We'd connect them all up on a network and play video games. One of my favorite video games was this bomb defuse kind of mode, where one team would have to take a bomb to a certain place, plant the bomb, and then they would arm it, and then the other team would announce to the entire, everyone in the game that, hey, the bomb's been planted, and now the other team knows they have to go try to defuse it. So I developed the Pi bomb, which is not really a bomb, okay, just to make that clear. Don't call security or anything. But this is actually what it looks like. It's another little box, and I do have it here. So it's another one of these little boxes, and it's also powered by Pi Zero wireless inside. And I got a little video here of how it works. And basically what you'll see is the timers, notice the timers are synchronized. So you got the 2 timer boxes. They're counting down. They're at like 18 minutes. Then one team would take the bomb to a designated location, try to get there, and they would flip the switch on, and they would have to arm it. And they can arm it by pressing any of the buttons they want. Okay? When they arm it, now you can't hear it in the video because the sound's not working in this presentation, but it announces to the entire field that the bomb has been planted. And notice the times have all changed. So all the timers on the field have been synchronized to the 5 minutes. So now they have 5 minutes. The other team has 5 minutes to get there and to defuse the device. Now when they come back and the other team flips on the device, they don't know which button was used to arm it. If you press the wrong button, it announces to the field, hey, you've pressed, the bomb has been, or bomb defusal failure. Lock out for 15 seconds. And so for 15 seconds, none of the buttons work, which means you're sitting there sweating and praying you survive long enough to defuse it. If you defuse it, it then announces to the entire field, hey, stop, the bomb has been defused. And so actually, I don't know if you'll be able to see this in here. I can go ahead and maybe if I hold it up to my mic, you can hear it. But I just press the button. You should see.
The device has been armed. You have less than 1 minute to defuse the device.
So for Stir Trek, I lowered it down to 1 minute. But so if I armed it, I pressed the white button to arm it. I would now flip the master control switch, I call them, flip the master control switch off. The timer stays on, but the button is no longer illuminated, which one I selected. So now if I turn it back on, all the buttons are flashing.
30 seconds remaining. 30 seconds.
Yeah, and across the field, it's letting people know how much time they have before the bomb goes off. So if I press the wrong button,
bomb defusal failure. Bomb defusal failure. Lockout for 15 seconds.
Yes. So now I'm locked out, so none of the buttons will work. Now, poll in here real quick, raise of hands. Do you want me to defuse it or let it go off? All right, we'll let it go off.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
All right. And those, right. And so that would be broadcasted across all the speakers in the field. So everyone would hear that across the field that it went off. And normally I shut it, anyways, the message normally follows up with stop, stop, stop. So people stop shooting each other. That's always important. Now actually I will show you, I can still press the button to defuse it.
Success. Device has been defused.
Yeah. So anyways, that's what happens when you do that. Anyway, so that's what, I always wanted to do that. And so we actually did have that in time for the game last November. It was a lot of fun. People had a lot of fun playing with it. We've used it several times since then. It's a game mode we throw in during our games, and the kids really like it. And I've actually been very surprised at how well it works and hasn't been broken yet. But one last project I want to share with you. How much time do we have? We've got about 20 minutes. Okay, perfect. So you might think, what in the world? Shrek, we go from Paintball to the Shrek musical. Well, what happened is a longtime friend of mine is actually the pastor of our church now, too. He volunteered to help our local high school with the prop development design, not really actually the construction, I should say. So building all the scenery, constructing all the scenery. he knew that I was into technology. Also, I was big into radio-controlled stuff for a long time. So he said, hey, Barry, for this musical, we got these large trees that they want to bring in and out on these tracks. He said, wouldn't it be cool if we could have like a remote control or something that we could actually automatically push on the remote control and have the trees come in? Because they plan on having them in different positions for different scenes and even move during some of the scenes. And of course, we had the obvious thing, there's a lot easier ways to do this, but being techies, he actually had an engineering background too. I said, yeah, I think we can try something. So I did some research, and this is initially what I came up with on the kitchen table. I actually didn't know anything about DC motors, so I knew we were going to have some sort of motor. I actually started asking around. I have a friend, Scott Preston. If you're familiar with him, he does the Iron Man talks. He also does robotics. He pointed me to, hey, a windshield wiper motor might be perfect for what you need. And turns out $26 from Amazon, shipped to my door, has lots of torque, and so I hooked it up. And initially I had my old transmitter hooked up to a receiver, which was then connected to an Arduino, because the Arduino could understand the signals from the receiver. And then the Arduino was connected to an H-bridge. It sounds like a song, right? Connected to the, anyways. So the Arduino is then connected to the motor. But when the H-bridge is connected to the motor. An H-bridge, I didn't know what it was until a few months ago when I bought one. But an H-bridge allows you to send a signal to it and to control the flow of electricity. So from the Arduino, I can send a message to the H-bridge. And the H-bridge would then control how much power flows to the motor and in which direction. Because a simple DC motor, you just change the direction of electricity and it reverses direction of the motor, right? So that's what the H-bridge does. So I had this working, and sure enough, I got it to where you could move the stick on the remote, and which direction, if you moved it one way on the remote, the motor would spin one way. And also, it would spin as fast. If you moved it all the way to the far right, it would spin as fast as it could. If you came back a little bit, it could make it spin slower. If you went the other direction, the motor would spin the other way. And so I was actually happy I got this thing working. But then as we started talking about it, hey, we're going to have 4 of these trees. And then there's something else we might want to also incorporate into all of this. Wouldn't it be nice if we could just push a button and have it control all of these motors with the push of a button? And instead of having having these remote controls and people manually trying to wiggle them around. So we ended up scrapping the whole remote control thing as far as a transmitter and receiver. And we actually ended up throwing a Pi 0 in the mix. So take the receiver out and the transmitter, we put a Pi 3 and have the Pi 3 talk to an Arduino. That's what I ended up doing. So I used Flask again on the Pi, the little Pi 0, and to allow it to submit a little simple REST API to the Pi 0 to say, hey, turn the motor on for this many seconds, spin in this direction for this amount of time. Or wait, I already said that. Anyways, at this speed. So that's what we ended up coming up with. Oh, yeah, and this is us actually trying to install one of the trees. And I'm the guy kneeling down there, and you see, I've got my finger through his belt loop because, that's going to keep him safe if he falls. I was giving this talk at work, and someone said, is that track up there, is that a load bearing? And I said, well, it is in this point in time, right? But anyways, we survived, and those are the trees we were actually trying to move in the tracks. And so we ended up hooking these wiper motors up with these Pis and had this all up in the rafters to move these things. I've got a short video on my kitchen table of how it worked. This is my little box here where you can see I've got the, like I said, this is low tech. Actually, that's Velcro on the back of that Pi 0 holding it to the box. This is a little phone app I wrote using a Ionic framework. So you had a button for each scene. We ended up with like 12 scenes. But you can see you press the button, the motors move. Then you could go through the phone app, you could configure each motor. So I go to scene 1 and say, hey, for scene 1, I need a motor, maybe I need this motor to move the other direction. So you can actually change, okay, make that motor move the other direction, speed this motor up. If you wanted to, you can see there, you could change the time. But this is for that one scene. We ended up with 5 motors and 12 scenes. You save that, and now you see the motors move differently, based on the way you coded, you configured it in the phone app. We actually also created a better phone app that only give you one button at a time. So you could, by default, it was in production mode. So you could only go from the first scene to the second scene. You couldn't accidentally skip scenes. So it'd show you scene 1, you'd push it. It'd give you a little loading screen while the things moved, and then it would pop up and give you the second button, scene 2 button. But anyways, So I've got an actual demonstration of this working live and in the play. Here we go, play night. There's the trees moving, and Shrek comes out, and the trees are still moving. And I got to laugh because we put this together. I was really impressed with the amount of work we did. He came to me the end of December, early January, and the play was in early March. And we put all this together and got it working. But then, this is all it is. All we did was move some trees. All of that work, all that technology, and we moved some trees around. We did also bring a big styrofoam moon, drop it in. I didn't have a video of that, but this was one of those things, we wanted to see if we could, and it actually all worked out really well. People were excited about it. We didn't charge the school anything for this. I bought all the pies and all the motors and used it for the play, and then I just took it back. I'm going to repurpose it. But anyways, it was a fun project. Learned a whole lot through that process as well. So speaking of lessons learned, I feel that I'm a little less dumb than I used to be when I started these projects. So I'm going to share real quickly a few of the lessons that I've learned. One thing is when you come into a project like this, to break things down into the smallest components and test them. For example, that last project with the Shrek play and the motors. I didn't know anything about electric motors, so I got my windshield wiper motor, and I first just how do you turn this thing on? There's actually 5 wires. I snipped the wires and said, okay, well, let's hook these 2 wires up to a battery. Okay, that didn't do anything. Let's try these 2 wires. Okay, I actually did some Googling and found out how it should work, and anyways, I tested it. So first step was just to test to get the motor to work. Hook it up this way, it spins one way. Reverse the wires, it spins the other way. Okay, good, motor works. Next thing, when I was using the transmitter, the remote and the receiver, let's just see if my receiver, if the Arduino can hear a message or get a message from the receiver. So I wrote a little simple program that just spit out, yes, I received this movement or this input from the receiver. So, because you can easily get bogged down, especially with this the RaspberryPi project with the paintball stuff. There's a lot of things I wanted to do there, and a lot of things involved as I kind of went through. So you need to break things down into small pieces and test and learn with each step. Also, the next thing is to prioritize and keep focused, stay on target. Right, especially when I was doing the the paintball project, I knew I wanted the things to talk. I knew I needed to synchronize the time. I knew I needed a way to set up a wireless network, and all of those were kind of mini projects in of themselves. And sometimes I was tempted to jump from one to the other. Okay, well, I'm frustrated. I can't get this wireless network thing, so let me work on this other thing. Or I'll just get distracted, I should say, not give up. But I found it's nice if you can keep focused and get one task done. You can feel like you're accomplishing things. And it's also kind of like a Lego project. You're building a large Lego car. You build the engine, and that's one component that's done. And you can see how that will fit in the rest of the whole thing. So something else I learned. Another thing is a voltmeter is useful. Give you a second. All right, I'll give you guys a second. Yeah, that's not really a voltmeter. Well, it is in one way. It's not a voltmeter you want to use, I'll tell you that. But get a voltmeter and learn how to use it. They are great for testing diodes, LEDs. This is if you're going to, like I said, go further and use an Arduino or Pi with light switches and other things like that. So anyways, and I say learn to use it because I almost melted mine once because I didn't know how to use it. Again, I was an electronics noob. Anyways, another step is to walk away. I found many times that I would be just heads down, writing some code, things were not working, I couldn't get things to work the right way. Or one specific example, with the bomb box that has all the flashy lights, the buttons that flash, that was a whole lot harder than I thought it should have been. Because those little lights, those buttons, to get them to shine nice and bright, I wanted to use 5 volts of power. That's what they could use, and that would make them nice and bright. However, the Pi, you can't control 5 volts of power out of the Pi. You can have a steady 5 volts coming out of the Pi, but you can't turn it on and off. The Pi does allow you to control 3 volts. So it's got these pins that have 3 volts of power to turn, and you can turn that on and off. But I needed the extra power to make my LEDs brighter. So I had to come up with a way for those 3 volts, turning them on and off, to control and allow the 5 volts to flow. Well, being an idiot, I didn't understand that that's exactly what a transistor does. So I figured out, after doing a bunch of research, I found, oh, okay, that's what a transistor does. You can use one smaller voltage to allow a larger voltage to flow through. but I couldn't get it to work. I watched a bunch of videos, did some research, and I understood the theory, but it wasn't working. I finally walked away and had an epiphany. I was like, okay, wait, I've tried this, tried that, and then I realized, wait, I haven't tried this. The one thing I didn't try was spinning it around and connecting it just a different way. But it was a ridiculous thing. I was working on it for like an hour straight, and as soon as I walk away, I got a different perspective, and I came back to the problem, was able to solve it. So it allows you to rethink. Here's the other thing I found out. Right? Things change often. So the different libraries you're using, I found things change so fast that the first answer you find may not be new enough. So for example, my Ionic app that I wrote to control the Shrek motors, I would Google, hey, how to do this in Ionic. And well, go to Stack Overflow and you see this post that's been, checkmarked and upvoted 260 some times. It says, this is the way you do that thing in Ionic. Well, I try it and it doesn't work. Well, then I find out that's for Ionic version 1. Oh, and then there's an Ionic version 2. And now it's just Ionic framework because versions are so last year. Nobody uses version numbers anymore, right? So you got to find, for whatever library or package you're using, sometimes it's so new that the answer is a little bit harder to find. So I would go down on Stack Overflow. I'd sometimes have to skip the highest upvoted answer and read down and see someone says, hey, for the new version of your, let's say your Raspbian or your Debian Stretch OS, you have to do it this way, or for whatever it is for Ionic framework, for the new version, this is the way you do it. So that was something I wish to know. The other thing is a tip I learned is to use the source. Like I mentioned for the Python, or from Python controlling the displays on these things, go to the GitHub repo, search through their issues. Maybe the problem you're having is already documented in their issues, and maybe even the solution is in there as well, or link to it. Look at the source code, find those examples, the APIs. Sometimes you might find hidden configuration options or better information about configuration options in there as well. I know for my little digital displays here, I wanted to be able in the future, I'd like to be able to put messages on there, put not just numbers, but letters. Now, of course, with a 7-segment display, there's only a certain number or certain amount of letters you could do. And the Python package that they had written supported some of those letters, but I found, digging into the source, which ones it didn't support, and then also how to add that support. So I could actually put different messages on the display if I want to. Also, commit your own code. You don't want to lose it, and you also sometimes might want to be able to roll back. So using source control management is important. There's been times I'm going down the wrong path. I'm like, oh man, I've got tangled a big nasty web here. I'd like to just go back to where I was. And so just using Git throughout my project really helped me to do that. And another thing is document all your things. One interesting way to document things is through unit testing. Now, I'll admit I didn't do a great job of this on a lot of my stuff. Some of it's the fact that it's hard to unit test code that's interacting with the hardware on the Pi. I don't know if maybe someone else can help me understand frameworks or testing frameworks out there to test that. But like when I was interacting with the display package to write out to the, to my timer, I'd have had to, anyways, some work involved. Anyways, but unit testing, I did unit test a lot of the code that I could, and that helps me go back in the future and look at my unit test to understand what this code was supposed to do. Another thing is document. If you're using GitHub or Git, there's the README Markdown. I ended up documenting a lot of things in there. Like I mentioned, I had struggles with finding documentation for the Ionic framework because there's version 1, version 2, and then there's just Ionic framework. So how do I actually build my phone app as a, package as an APK? So I documented that here. And also other little tidbits about my different projects I would put in the README, not for someone else's benefit as much as for my own benefit. And it's very valuable, even just going back, preparing for this presentation, stuff I'd done, 6-7 months ago, and remembering what I did. Another big thing I found very valuable was to script things. Using Ansible, I knew that I was going to be creating multiple boxes for these timers for Paintball. And so I decided after the first one, hey, let me look at some ways to script this. I looked at Puppet and a few other things, and I found that Ansible was actually very easy to use. I mean, you don't have to set up anything on your different boxes. You install something on your server, and then you write these, what they call recipes, that just define the steps. Because to just set up one of these little timer boxes, I had to install the package from Adafruit for the Python to write out to the LED. I had to configure the network time protocol. I had to configure the wireless network. I had to install the eSpeak package. I had to configure my sound drivers and the sound card. Those are a lot of manual steps I had to go through to install those different packages and set things up. If I had to go back and do it today, I would spend tons of time researching it if I didn't document it. And the way I documented it was through Ansible scripts. So now actually, like we had a game a few months ago, and I knew we needed another box without a display, but a box we could hook up to some very loud speakers that were plugged in. So I just used my scripts to set that up, and it was really easy. So some things I'd wished I'd done or known before. Centralized logging. With distributed headless projects, it can be confusing when something goes wrong with one of my timer boxes, which actually doesn't happen very often. Now, I'll admit, with the Shrek play, we had a few times motors did not move the way we wanted them to, and we didn't know why. It would have been really nice if I was writing out events. You know, this happened. You know, I got this message to move this amount of time, this speed, or this error happened, and I logged that somewhere to like a server, a queue on a server that I could then pull up. That really helped in troubleshooting. Last thing is I learned that Python is the best around. Okay, no, that's a joke. Actually, for the Raspberry Pis, they do recommend Python. There's a lot of support. And actually, I tried some other languages initially for my projects. But I found that most of the libraries for your aftermarket parts, like the Adafruit add-ons, they have Python libraries already to make it easier to use them, and they also have the examples in Python. If you tried to use something like JavaScript, Java, or Jython, I've actually found with Jython, Jython won't even work because for a lot of these hardware-specific things, it needs Python C extensions, and Jython doesn't support that yet. So I just found if you want to have the least path of resistance, you know, using Python, if you're going to get into working with some other third-party hardware, might be the easiest. Or the best thing is to find out if you're using some other hardware add-on, find out what packages they have and what languages they support as far as that goes. And for me, I had to learn Python to do all this. I'd never touched Python before starting these projects, so that was a learning curve. But actually, and also, I was going to say, there's not as many resources for using other There's not as many resources for using other languages on the Pi. So not that you can't, you definitely can. Just be aware that if you start going down another path with another language, you might not have as much support for it right now. But hey, you can create your own path and then share it with everyone else. So what I want to leave you with is that innovation can take you places. Obviously, this is the Tesla in space, right? That took a lot of innovative thought behind that to get that whole thing launched up there. Now, we may not be launching cars into space, but with the technology we have available to us, you know, there's really hardly any limit to what we can do. And the technology is so cheap. You know, these Pis are $35 for the powerhouse, right? These little displays, there's all kinds of sensors. You know, they support wireless networking. All of this is at our fingertips. So I challenge you guys, get out there, play, innovate, and just have fun doing it, and share what you learn with others. With that, if we have time, how much time?
You have 2 minutes. There are 3 questions.
Okay.
The easiest question first. How do you power the Pi in the box?
How do you power the Pi in the box? All right, so in the box, I used little phone chargers, battery backups, like a battery you'd use to charge your phone in an emergency or whatever.
Next question. How long do your cell phone booster batteries last while powering the Pi and the display?
Great question. So I initially said I wasn't sure how much power I was going to need, so I bought these 10,000 milliamp batteries, and it turns out that it'll power one of these things for 2 days straight, and probably even more than that. So I kind of went a little overboard. So I've literally charged the batteries, ran a game, which lots of times our games, by the time I set up the boxes, plug them in, and by the time we finish in the evening, you know, it's six hours that this thing has been on. I'll pack it away for a month, come back for the next game, not even charge it, and we're good to go for another day. So they actually last a long time.
How do you make the explosions?
Yeah, so actually one thing I didn't cover is that I also use a little utility called aplay. It's simple, just plays a WAV file. So I added some code to not only use eSpeak to say things, but to just play simple WAV files as well. So yeah, so each of them also can play a WAV file. That's what I did. So I will be at the Nationwide booth right out here for the rest of the day. Feel free to stop by. I'll have this stuff you can get more up close and hands-on. You can contact me if you want to, btarlton@gmail.com. My slides are at this URL if you want to see them. Most useful thing maybe my slides is at the end of the slides, I have these 2 pages of resources which link directly to a lot of the hardware I used and also my Git repo out on GitHub and so other things like that. So, and all of those resources again are in my slides, which you can find at bit.ly/pi paintball. That's pi, P-I. And that's all I have to say about that. Thank you guys.